Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We're going to be talking about a great topic today, and that is the current trends in board member compensation. And joining me to delve into this topic is Marc Ullman, who's a partner with Meridian Compensation Partners. Marc, welcome.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be with you.
So the first thing we want to talk about is we've seen sort of a reduction in the number of companies that are paying meeting fees. They're going to a retainer. I'm not sure how I feel about this, whether that's a positive move or not, so I'll be curious to hear your comments. Seems like in certain circumstances, particularly when a company's sort of challenged. I remember Health South, when they were having their big problems, they had 52 board meetings. They had one a week for a year. Now, I wouldn't want to be on a retainer if I was coming in every week, but talk a little bit about what you're seeing with this trend on eliminating meeting fees, moving to retainer.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The trend, I think, has probably leveled off a little bit. The number of companies that moved to retainer only, a lot of that happened over the last few years. I think we found a nice leveling out. The thinking behind the retainer only is that, first of all, director compensation programs are designed for the normal year, for a typical year. So a Health South instance like yours, director compensation generally doesn't contemplate those sorts of years. It's sort of the normal course. Many companies went to the retainer only because the reality is a lot of the work doesn't happen in the meetings anyway. A lot of the work as a board member may be in between meetings, whether it's phone calls or discussions or preparing agendas or getting feedback, and there's a lot of activity that goes on beyond the meetings. So the $1,000 or $1,500 meeting fee is really a token in many cases. It's not really indicative of the amount of work that's going on. So I think a lot of companies said it's administratively easier to just do a retainer only. Director compensation is really about fairness for directors. So they want to deliver fair compensation based on the sort of company they're in, the industry, the size. And they want to do that as easily as possible. So retainer only arrangements allow for that. And there's no debate anymore about what's a meeting, what's not a meeting. Is it a phone call? Is that a meeting? So a lot of that sort of goes away in a retainer only situation. Now for companies that are retainer only and they have a situation like you described for Health South, what you will see is companies going and doing ad hoc one-time payments to reflect the increased workload that they had. I think there's concern about how that might be viewed by shareholders, but that is an easy way to deal with sort of a pop in the workload for a given director in a retainer-only environment.
Well, being fair is certainly one of the key criteria, but it's also we want to motivate the right behavior, which compensation is always about motivating the right behavior. And that's a great segue into our next thing. We want to talk about the pay mix, okay, where we're looking at 60% stock, 40% cash, which I think is sort of the mix that we see today. There's been movement. I've seen movement where people want it to be all in equity. And obviously there was a time many years ago where we were just paying meeting fees, where there wasn't equity. Then they wanted equity in, so you were thinking more like a shareholder. Now people want you to just have equity. I am totally against that, okay, because I think that will, again, prompt different behavior than when you have a fixed amount and a equity amount. You got to make sure that the directors are not focusing on stock price and what's happening relative to that. Now, I understand that this isn't a big part of their wealth, but it's just human nature, and I think that's why I'm in favor of the split. But what do you see happening in the market?
Well, I think it's important to remember that directors' pay arrangements is a fee-for-service arrangement. It's not a pay-for-performance arrangement. So what organizations do is they say, all right, what is the fee for a director of a company like ours, our size, et cetera? And they, when you look at market data, it's pretty tight. When you look at a set of $10 billion companies in the manufacturing space, those directors are paid very similarly. So the idea of a fee for service is what, the service is, being a fiduciary, of course, in the oversight responsibility. It's not pay for performance. So they establish a pay amount, and they deliver that, just as you said, through cash and stock. The stock represents, just like you said, the alignment with shareholders, so that they at least have the shareholders' experience as part of their own in terms of how their pay ultimately is delivered. But the cash piece is a risk mitigator, really, to your point. If things go wrong, you still have a fee-for-service situation. We don't want a situation where the directors, the only way they can get paid is if the share price goes up or if the share price doesn't go down. It's partly why we don't see stock options very often in director compensation. Very few companies use stock options. And it's to keep that line between the oversight that the directors have with management. Now, you don't want directors focused on the actual performance of the share price. You want them focused on the oversight. Is the strategy right? Is our management team right? Are our governance policies in place and being maintained? That is a fee-for-service situation. An all equity could create some risk. It's interesting, in Europe, in England, equity would not be part of the pay program. It's very much a fee-for-service. So I think in the United States, we've sort of found the right balance, generally speaking.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. And when you look at pay across the spectrum, most of it seems to be fair. I mean, it seems to be fair from the time that you spent. It is not fair from the risk that exists. And if there's challenges, it's not quite fair from even the time that you spend. But one of the biggest aberrations that I've seen is between the responsibilities of the outside chairperson and the title of lead director, okay? And I think if my numbers are correct, the average, if you look at the Fortune 100, which I admit is a small segment of the top group, the average for the non-executive chairperson, okay, is around $220,000. For the lead director, it's $30,000. Now, I got to tell you, the responsibilities of those, if everybody's doing it right, are not that different, okay? And so how come the difference, and what's going to happen with this?
Well, I think there are some differences between the two roles, and we see that out in the marketplace. I mean, that's a very big difference in pay levels. The chairman of the board and CEO in those instances, they are chairing the board. That is their role as a chair. The lead director is representing generally the independent directors and is leading that group, partnering with the chairman. The lead director often works closely with the chairman, but the chairman is carrying, I think, a bit more of the responsibility in general than a lead director. And I think we see that bearing out a little bit. As we see, if it was the same role, I think we'd probably see less shareholders calling for the separation of the chairman of the board from the CEO, because in most companies where the CEO is also the chairman, there's almost always a lead director. Yet there is still call for splitting those two roles. So I think there is a difference. I think that we're going to see some change potentially. There's a huge focus on corporate governance. There is a push for separating the chairman and the CEO. And I think in instances where the chairman and the CEO don't get separated, we may see some more responsibilities placed on the lead director. We might see that gap close a little bit, but that is quite a big gap. And I think it is indicative of the difference in the roles. It may not be obvious to everyone, but the chairman and the lead director in many organizations will have very different workloads.
Well, I'm going to argue with you, okay, because we're talking about non-executive. Now, if the CEO is also the chairman, the lead director there is nobody in between. They have to take on the responsibilities of representing. And I don't care if it's creating an agenda or if it's handling any of the duties that would be similar to the non-executive chair. The only difference is they aren't running that meeting, okay, at that point. But all the communications that are occurring, because the CEO is also the chairman, fall on the lead director if they have that responsibility. So when you see a study like this, there's just not that, when you're talking about non-executive, meaning outside chairman of the board, where the CEO is not the chairman, and a lead director, and if I put those side by side, yes, one is running the meeting, but past that, they're so close. I just think that has to be something that's looked at going forward.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. Thank you for that. So the non-executive chairman who's earning $220 a year versus the non-executive lead director who's just not the chairman. Those responsibilities are more similar, but they are definitely not exactly the same. And but I think the point I was trying to make earlier is I think those responsibilities may converge, and we may see a falling of that gap, and we may see an increase in the lead director's fees in coming years.
Yeah. So this is a great study, and I think you do it on an annual basis. Where can people get a copy of this? Because this seems like great information.
Yes, we do it annually. It can be found on our website at www.meridiancp.com, Meridian Compensation Partners, meridiancp.com. And we update that every year, and people can go to our site and find that report.
You also have an app, don't you, that people can get, that they can tap into and get a lot of the research and stuff that you have?
Yeah, we have an app. It can be found on the iTunes store. It could also be found on our website. It's called the Compensation Committee Handbook. It's updated regularly. We've gotten great feedback on that. Things like data from our surveys get pushed into that app, so it's updated regularly. We've gotten great feedback on that, so thank you for mentioning it.
And we'll try and get a copy of this study on our site as well so that people can get it there. So Marc, I want to thank you for taking the time. Very important topic, obviously, but we appreciate that you were able to join us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And that will conclude another edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.